Hello, I present to you my latest novel, Ascension of the Divine Farmer. Chapter 1. The Beginning of the Path. In a small, secluded village nestled between towering mountains, young Wei Long was unlike any other. The son of farmers, his life seemed destined for obscurity, tilling the land alongside his parents and struggling to make ends meet. Yet, deep inside, there was always a spark, a longing for something greater. His sharp eyes often drifted to the horizon, imagining the vast world beyond the mountains, filled with opportunities that would remain forever out of reach for someone like him. Or so he thought. It was a typical morning. The villagers bustled about, preparing for the harvest. Wei Long, only 16, worked the fields with the strength and dexterity that had earned him the admiration of his neighbors. His father often boasted about his son's potential, but Wei Long knew that potential meant little in a world where strength ruled, where cultivators wielded unimaginable power and lived lives far beyond the mundane. After the day's work, as the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, casting an orange hue across the sky, Wei Long wandered toward the ancient forest bordering the village. He often came here to think, to escape the monotony of daily life. The villagers warned him to stay away, claiming the forest was home to creatures and mysteries best left undisturbed. Yet tonight, something felt different. There was a hum in the air, a subtle shift that Wei Long couldn't quite place. As he ventured deeper into the forest, the sounds of nature seemed to fade away, replaced by an eerie silence. His instincts told him to turn back, but a strange force pulled him forward, guiding him towards something hidden among the trees. Soon, he found himself standing before a massive stone tablet, half buried in the earth and overgrown with moss. Strange symbols, unlike any he'd seen before, covered its surface. A single, narrow slit ran through the center of the stone, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. Wei Long hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of him. He reached out, his fingers barely brushing the stone's surface before a surge of energy shot through him. His vision blurred and he stumbled backward, gasping for breath. When the world finally came back into focus, the glow from the tablet had intensified. From the slit in the stone, a mist began to seep out, curling and twisting in the air until it formed the vague outline of a figure. A voice, ancient and powerful, echoed through the forest. "Young one, you have been chosen." Wei Long's heart raced. Chosen? For what? To inherit what has been forgotten, to walk the path of cultivation, to reach heights beyond the heavens. Cultivation. It was a word every child knew, but it belonged to the world of legends and immortals, not farmers. Wei Long could hardly believe what he was hearing. "But why me?" he asked, his voice trembling with both fear and excitement. "You possess the potential," the voice said. "Within you lies the seed of greatness, but it is up to you to nurture it, to unlock your true power. Take the first step, and the path will reveal itself." Without waiting for a reply, the mist surged forward, enveloping Wei Long. His body felt like it was being torn apart, every muscle and bone burning with an unbearable intensity. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Yet, despite the agony, there was a sense of clarity, as if a door within his mind had been opened. He could feel something stirring deep inside him, a dormant power, waiting to be awakened. The mist slowly dissipated, leaving Wei Long alone in the clearing. The stone tablet had returned to its dormant state, the glow fading into nothingness. Wei Long lay on the ground, drenched in sweat, his chest heaving as he struggled to comprehend what had just happened. For several moments, he remained there, staring up at the night sky. The stars twinkled overhead, indifferent to his newfound revelation. Finally, he stood, his legs shaky but filled with a sense of purpose he had never known before. He needed to leave the village. Whatever had just happened, it was only the beginning. He couldn't stay here and live a simple life anymore. There was a world beyond these mountains, a world of cultivators, of power, of destiny. Wei Long clenched his fists, determination burning in his eyes. He didn't know where the path would lead him, but he was ready to walk it. This was his chance to rise above the life he had been born into, to become someone greater than he had ever imagined. As he made his way back to the village, his thoughts raced. He would need supplies, a plan. He couldn't tell his parents. He couldn't burden them with the truth. They wouldn't understand. They'd only try to stop him, to keep him grounded in the life of a farmer. But Wei Long knew he was destined for more. The journey ahead would be long and dangerous, but with the power of cultivation, he believed anything was possible. His mind wandered to the stories he had heard of legendary cultivators, men and women who had reached the pinnacle of power, who could control the very elements, who had defeated demons and monsters alike. Wei Long smiled to himself. One day his name would be among them. But for now, he was just a boy with a dream, standing at the beginning of a path that would take him far beyond the world he knew. And so Wei Long's journey began, one filled with challenges, dangers, and the discovery of powers far beyond his imagination. But with each step, he would grow stronger. With each battle, his resolve would harden, and one day, the world would know his name. Chapter 2: First Steps Toward Power. The following morning, Wei Long awoke with a sense of unease. His body ached in ways he had never experienced before, as though he had spent days in grueling labor. His mind, however, was sharper than ever. He could still feel the remnants of the strange power that had surged through him the previous night, a faint hum beneath the surface of his skin, waiting to be tapped into. He sat up, wincing slightly as his muscles protested the movement. The familiar sight of his small, humble room greeted him, the simple wooden furniture his father had built, the faint smell of dried herbs his mother kept by the window. Yet everything felt different now. He wasn't the same boy he had been yesterday. Quietly, he rose and dressed, his mind racing. Today would be the day he set out on his journey. But first, there were things he needed to do. Stepping outside, he was greeted by the familiar sight of his village waking up. Smoke rose from the chimneys as villagers began their daily routines. Children played in the dirt streets while their parents prepared for another day of hard work. The sight made his heart clench with a mixture of fondness and regret. He would miss this place, the simple life it offered. But his path lay elsewhere now. Wei Long made his way to the shed where his father kept their tools. As he rummaged through the shelves, searching for supplies, his father appeared in the doorway, his brow furrowed. "Up early again?" his father asked, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. "You've been restless lately. Something on your mind?" Wei Long paused, gripping the handle of a worn satchel. He had never been good at lying to his father. The man could read him like an open book. But how could he explain the events of the previous night without sounding insane? "I've been thinking," Wei Long said slowly, keeping his eyes on the ground. "I don't know if I want to be a farmer for the rest of my life." His father was silent for a moment, and when Wei Long dared to glance up, he saw the flash of concern in his father's eyes. "You know the world beyond the village isn't kind to people like us. We live this way for a reason. The world of cultivators, it's not a place for common folk." "I know," Wei Long replied, his voice firmer now. "But I'm not a common person, Father. I feel it. Something changed last night. I don't know how to explain it, but I need to find out what it is. I need to become stronger." His father's expression softened, though his eyes remained heavy with worry. "Strength isn't everything, Wei Long. There's more to life than power." Wei Long nodded, though his thoughts strayed. His father was right, of course, but power was the key to everything in this world. Without it, they were at the mercy of forces far beyond their control. And Wei Long had no intention of remaining weak. "I'll be careful," Wei Long promised, slinging the satchel over his shoulder. "I'll write whenever I can." His father sighed, stepping forward to place a hand on Wei Long's shoulder. "Your mother will worry herself sick, you know." "I'll come back," Wei Long said, meeting his father's gaze with steely determination. "I promise." With that, he turned and left the shed, his heart heavy but resolute. There was no turning back now. Wei Long's journey led him toward the base of the mountains, following a dirt path that eventually gave way to dense forest. He moved with a sense of purpose, though the weight of uncertainty pressed on his mind. He had no formal training, no knowledge of the cultivation world beyond the tales he had heard growing up, but something deep within him urged him forward, a voice whispering that his destiny lay ahead. By midday, the sun hung high in the sky, and the heat beat down on him. His thoughts wandered back to the strange voice he had heard the night before. It had spoken of power, of unlocking his potential. But what did that mean? How did one even begin the process of cultivation? Suddenly, a rustling in the bushes ahead snapped him out of his thoughts. Wei Long froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the small knife at his belt. His heart pounded as the rustling grew louder, and before he could react, a large figure burst out from the foliage. A boar, its tusks gleaming in the sunlight. Wei Long's breath caught in his throat. The creature was massive, far larger than any wild animal he had seen near the village. It pawed at the ground, its beady eyes locked on him, clearly preparing to charge. Instinct took over. He stepped back, but the boar was faster. With a snort, it barreled toward him. Its tusks aimed straight at his chest. Time seemed to slow as Wei Long's mind raced. He couldn't outrun it, not at this speed. In that split second, something shifted within him. The hum beneath his skin, the faint, dormant power, suddenly flared to life. Without thinking, he raised his hand and focused on the energy coursing through him. A surge of heat spread through his body, and a faint glow appeared in his palm. With a roar, Wei Long thrust his hand forward, and a burst of energy shot out from his palm. The force slammed into the boar, sending it flying backward. The creature let out a pained squeal as it crashed into a nearby tree, stunned, but not yet dead. Wei Long stared at his hand in shock. His chest heaved, his heart racing as the realization sank in. He had just used cultivation. He had tapped into the mysterious power inside him. The boar struggled to its feet, shaking off the blow, but Wei Long was no longer afraid. He could feel the energy still thrumming through him, waiting to be called upon again. This time, he was ready. With a fierce cry, Wei Long charged forward, his hand once again glowing with energy. He slammed his fist into the boar's side, and the creature collapsed with a final, pitiful grunt. Panting, Wei Long stood over the boar's lifeless body, his mind spinning. He had done it. He had used cultivation, just like the legendary warriors from the stories. But this was only the beginning. The power he had tapped into felt raw, unrefined. There was so much more to learn, so much more to master. Wei Long wiped the sweat from his brow and looked down at the fallen boar. It would make a fine meal, but more importantly, it was proof that he was no longer the weak boy from the village. He was on his way to becoming something greater. As he continued deeper into the forest, the weight of his newfound abilities settled on his shoulders. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but one thing was certain: he would face them head-on. His journey had only just begun. Chapter 3: The Awakening of Power. The forest was alive with the sounds of wildlife, the gentle hum of insects and the distant cries of birds overhead, but Wei Long was focused only on the path before him. His mind still buzzed with the memory of the power he had unleashed, the energy that had flowed through his body like a rushing river. He could feel it now, dormant but waiting, ready to be called upon again. But it was also unstable, wild, and unfamiliar. If he was going to survive the world of cultivators, he needed control, discipline, and more knowledge. After hours of trekking through the thick forest, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the undergrowth. Wei Long found a clearing near a stream and set up a small camp. He used his knife to carve a few branches into crude spears, his only line of defense for the night. Though he had managed to defeat the boar earlier, he knew that wild beasts weren't the only dangers lurking in these woods. Cultivators often ventured into such remote areas in search of herbs and spirit beasts, and many of them were not friendly. As the campfire crackled, Wei Long sat down on a fallen log, the warmth of the flames calming his restless thoughts. He had a lot to figure out. Cultivation was more than just tapping into raw power. It required technique, understanding, and patience. But where would he even begin? His thoughts turned back to the stone tablet from the previous night. The strange voice that had spoken to him seemed to know something about his potential, about the power he now possessed. But how could he find more answers? What was the next step? The crackling fire provided little solace as the forest grew darker, and the unfamiliar sounds of nocturnal creatures stirred the shadows. Despite his growing fatigue, Wei Long's eyes remained sharp, scanning the area for any sign of movement. The sense of danger had not left him since his encounter with the boar, and he had no intention of letting his guard down. Suddenly, a low rustling came from the bushes nearby. Wei Long jumped to his feet, gripping his makeshift spear tightly. His heart raced, but his mind was calm, focused. He could feel that hum of energy again, stirring beneath his skin. If there was another threat, he was ready to face it. Out of the darkness, a figure emerged, tall, draped in a long black robe, with a hood obscuring most of their face. The figure moved silently, their steps graceful and deliberate, as though they were gliding through the forest. Wei Long's grip tightened on the spear, his muscles tensing. "You're far from home, boy," the figure said, their voice smooth and calm, though it carried an edge of authority. "These woods aren't safe for someone like you." Wei Long didn't relax, keeping the spear pointed at the stranger. "Who are you?" The figure stopped a few paces away, tilting their head slightly. "Just a traveler. But you don't seem like an ordinary villager. I can feel the power within you, untrained, but potent." Wei Long's eyes narrowed. How did this person know? He hadn't even begun to understand his own abilities, yet this stranger seemed to see right through him. "What do you want?" A low chuckle came from the figure. "Nothing, for now. I'm merely curious. It's rare to find someone with such potential in these remote parts. Usually, young cultivators are brought to the sects for training." The mention of the sects stirred something in Wei Long. He had heard stories. Powerful organizations of cultivators who trained their disciples in the arts of cultivation. They were said to hold vast resources and knowledge, their members capable of feats far beyond what ordinary mortals could imagine. Could this figure be from one of those sects? "Are you a cultivator?" Wei Long asked, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. The figure remained silent for a moment, then reached up to lower their hood. Beneath the fabric was a man, his features sharp and his eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light. "A cultivator, without a doubt." "I am," the man said simply, "but not one aligned with any sect. I walk my own path, as you seem to be doing." Wei Long frowned. "How do you know that?" "Because you wouldn't be out here alone unless you were seeking something. Power, perhaps? Strength to change your fate?" The words struck deep. Wei Long's entire life had been spent in a village where he was destined to toil in the fields, never amounting to more than a humble farmer. But now, standing on the edge of a new path, he knew that wasn't enough. He wanted more. He needed more. "I want to become stronger," Wei Long admitted. "I've already started, but I don't know how to continue." The cultivator smiled faintly, though it was more of a smirk. "The desire for strength is a dangerous thing. Many have been consumed by it, losing themselves in their pursuit. But if you truly wish to grow stronger, you must first learn to harness the power within you. Uncontrolled power is as dangerous to you as it is to your enemies." Wei Long lowered his spear slightly, sensing that this man wasn't an immediate threat. "Then teach me. Help me learn." The cultivator's eyes gleamed with amusement. "You're bold, I'll give you that. But teaching you? That's not something I'm inclined to do without reason." "I can pay you," Wei Long blurted out, though he immediately regretted it. What could he possibly offer a cultivator of this level? The man chuckled again, shaking his head. "You've nothing of value to offer me, boy, but I'll give you a piece of advice, for free. Power comes with understanding. Understanding of yourself, of the world around you, and of the energy that flows through it. The first step to cultivation is meditation. Quiet your mind and feel the energy inside you. Learn to control it, to direct it. Only then can you begin to refine it." Wei Long frowned, a little disappointed. He had been hoping for something more concrete, but the man's words made sense. He had felt that power before, but only in moments of desperation or instinct. He needed to be able to summon it at will, to channel it into something greater. "I'll try," Wei Long said, his voice steady. The cultivator nodded, seeming satisfied with the response. "You'll find that the path of cultivation is long and arduous, but if you survive it, the rewards are beyond imagination." Without another word, the man turned and began to walk away, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Wei Long watched him go, his mind racing with thoughts of what he had learned. Meditation. It wasn't what he had expected, but it was a start. As the fire crackled softly, Wei Long sat down, closing his eyes and focusing inward. He could feel the faint pulse of energy within him, like a small flame waiting to be fanned into something more. Slowly he calmed his breathing, clearing his mind as best he could. He focused on that energy, willing it to come to the surface. Minutes passed, and then hours. The world around him faded away as he concentrated solely on the flow of energy inside him. It was difficult, more difficult than he had anticipated. But there were moments, brief flashes, where he could feel the energy responding to him, bending to his will. By the time dawn broke, Wei Long opened his eyes, feeling different. He hadn't mastered the energy yet, but he had taken the first step, and with each passing day, he would grow stronger. The path ahead was long, but Wei Long was ready to walk it. He had no teacher, no guide, but he had his determination and the power within him. That would be enough. It had to be. Wei Long encounters his first cultivator and begins to understand what lies ahead of him. The world beyond the village. The next few days passed in a blur, as Wei Long continued his journey through the forest, pushing deeper into unknown lands. He spent each night meditating by the fire, focusing on the flow of energy within him, trying to tame the wild force he had only just begun to understand. The lessons from the mysterious cultivator echoed in his mind, reminding him that power without control would be his downfall. Though his progress was slow, there were signs of improvement. Small bursts of energy that he could summon at will, though they still lacked the finesse of a true cultivator. One afternoon, Wei Long found himself standing at the edge of the forest, gazing out at a vast landscape beyond. A wide river snaked through the valley below, its waters sparkling in the sunlight, while distant hills rose like sentinels guarding the horizon. Beyond those hills lay cities, sects, and countless dangers, but also opportunities. The world of cultivation was out there, waiting for him. He had heard stories from travelers who passed through the village, tales of bustling cities filled with powerful merchants, scholars, and warriors. But most exciting of all were the sects, the prestigious schools of cultivation where the most gifted were trained to reach the pinnacle of power. For now, Wei Long knew he was far from ready to join such a sect, but it remained a goal in the back of his mind, a place where he could truly unlock his potential. As he descended from the forest into the valley, he caught sight of a small town nestled near the riverbank. It was larger than his village, with stone houses and a bustling marketplace, and the sight of it sent a surge of excitement through him. This was the world he had longed to see, the world of business, cultivation, and adventure. He needed supplies, information, and perhaps guidance. And this town was as good a place as any to start. The marketplace was alive with activity. Vendors shouted out their wares, from fresh fruits to exotic herbs, while customers haggled for the best prices. The scent of grilled meats and baked goods wafted through the air, making Wei Long's stomach rumble. He hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, and his meager rations were running low. He wandered through the market, taking in the sights and sounds. Many of the vendors sold items unfamiliar to him. Strange, glowing plants that hummed with energy. Weapons crafted from materials he couldn't name, and even pills said to enhance cultivation. He paused at a stall where a man with a long graying beard was selling a variety of cultivation manuals. "These are beginner techniques," the old man said, noticing Wei Long's interest. "Simple, but effective. A few silver coins could get you started on the right path, young man." Wei Long's heart raced as he stared at the manuals. They were exactly what he needed, a way to learn the basics of cultivation, to gain control over his growing power. But when he reached into his satchel, he found only a handful of copper coins. It wasn't enough. "I don't have enough," Wei Long said, disappointment heavy in his voice. The old man raised an eyebrow, scrutinizing him for a moment. You have the look of someone who's already begun cultivation. Tell you what, I'll give you a discount, a single silver coin, and this manual is yours." Wei Long's heart leaped, but he quickly realized he didn't even have that much. I don't have any silver." The old man sighed, his interest fading. "No silver, no manual. Come back when you can afford it, boy." Wei Long walked away from the stall, his mind racing. He needed that manual, but without silver, how was he supposed to buy anything? The reality of life outside the village began to set in. This world wasn't just about power. It was about survival. And without money, he would struggle to make it. As he wandered the marketplace, lost in thought, he overheard a group of men nearby discussing something that piqued his interest. "The mayor's offering a reward for anyone who can deal with the bandits outside the town," one man said, his voice low but excited. "They've been raiding the farms, stealing crops and supplies. 5 silver coins, to whoever brings back their leader's head. Wei Long stopped in his tracks. 5 silver coins? That was more than enough to buy the cultivation manual and set himself up with supplies for weeks. But bandits, that was no small task. He wasn't a warrior, nor was he fully in control of his power. Yet the thought of the reward was hard to ignore. He approached the men, his heart pounding. "Where can I find these bandits?" The group turned to him, surprised by his boldness. The man who had spoken earlier, a burly, middle-aged farmer, looked him up and down, sizing him up. "You think you can handle them, boy? They're hiding in the hills to the east. Nasty lot, dangerous, but if you're serious, the mayor's the one offering the reward. You can find him at the town hall." Wei Long nodded, determination flooding his veins. This was the opportunity he needed. If he could defeat these bandits, he would not only earn the silver, but also prove to himself that he was capable of more than just farming. It would be a true test of his abilities. "Thanks," Wei Long said, turning on his heel and heading toward the town hall. The town hall was a large, imposing building in the center of the town. Inside, Wei Long found the mayor seated behind a large wooden desk, surrounded by ledgers and scrolls. He was a stout man with a neatly trimmed beard and a pair of sharp eyes that immediately locked onto Wei Long as he approached. "I've heard about the bandits," Wei Long said without preamble. "I want to take the job." The mayor raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the young man standing before him. You look like you're barely out of boyhood. The bandits aren't farmers with pitchforks. They're armed men, and they won't hesitate to kill you." Wei Long's jaw tightened. "I'm not afraid. I'm stronger than I look. I just need the chance." The mayor studied him for a moment, as if weighing his options. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Fine. If you're that eager to throw your life away, I won't stop you. The bandits are hiding in a cave in the hills to the east. Bring me proof that you've dealt with their leader, and the reward is yours." Wei Long nodded, a fire burning in his chest. This was it, his first real challenge. He would show the world what he was capable of. The trek to the bandits' hideout was long and grueling. The hills were steep, and the rocky terrain made every step a struggle, but Wei Long pressed on, fueled by the thought of what awaited him at the end of this mission. He knew the risks. He was no seasoned warrior, and the bandits were likely experienced fighters. But he had something they didn't: the power of cultivation, however raw it might still be. By the time the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the hills, Wei Long found himself standing at the mouth of a cave. He crouched behind a large boulder, surveying the area. A small fire burned just outside the cave, with 2 rough-looking men seated around it, talking in low voices. These were no ordinary villagers. They were armed with swords and axes, their faces hardened by years of a violent life. Wei Long's heart raced. He could feel the energy inside him stirring, but the question was how to use it. The previous times he had called upon his power had been in moments of instinct, but now he needed precision, control. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, focusing inward. The energy within him responded, flowing through his veins like molten fire. When he opened his eyes, he felt ready. With a silent prayer, Wei Long stepped out from behind the boulder, his hand glowing faintly with the energy he had summoned. The bandits noticed him immediately, rising to their feet and drawing their weapons. Well, one of them sneered. "Look what we have here. A lost little lamb." Wei Long said nothing, his eyes focused and determined. He raised his hand, and before the bandits could react, he unleashed a blast of energy that sent one of them flying backward into the cave wall. The other charged at him with a yell, swinging his sword wildly, but Wei Long was ready. He sidestepped the attack and slammed his palm into the bandit's chest, sending a pulse of energy through his body. The bandit crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Panting, Wei Long stood over his fallen foes. He had won, but this was only the beginning. The bandit leader was still inside the cave, waiting. With renewed resolve, Wei Long stepped into the darkness of the cave, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Chapter 5. Into the Heart of Darkness. The air inside the cave was damp and cold, the walls slick with moisture. Every step Wei Long took echoed faintly, reminding him that he was walking into the unknown. He kept his senses sharp, his energy pulsing lightly beneath the surface of his skin, ready to unleash it at a moment's notice. The bandit leader would not be as easy to deal with as his henchmen outside, but Wei Long couldn't afford to back down now. As he moved deeper into the cave, the flickering light of a distant torch caught his eye. Shadows danced against the walls, elongating and shifting with the fire's movement. Wei Long crouched low, advancing silently until he could hear the muffled sound of voices coming from up ahead. He crept forward until he reached a large chamber. At its center was a fire pit surrounded by crude wooden furniture. A group of bandits sat around the fire, talking and laughing. Among them sat a hulking figure, larger than any of the others, with a scar running down the length of his face. His armor was rough but solid, a clear indication that he had fought his way to the top. This was the leader. Wei Long's heart pounded in his chest as he studied the scene. There were 6 men in total, all armed, and it would be impossible to take them by surprise without alerting the others. He needed a plan, but he didn't have time to overthink it. The bandit leader wasn't going to come out on his own, and Wei Long couldn't risk waiting any longer. Taking a deep breath, Wei Long stepped into the open. "I'm here for your head," he declared, his voice steady despite the tension thrumming through his body. The bandit stopped talking instantly, turning to face him with expressions ranging from surprise to amusement. The leader rose to his feet slowly, towering over the others. He grinned, revealing a set of yellowed teeth. Well, the leader growled, his voice like gravel. "Looks like we've got a brave one here. You come to collect the mayor's little bounty, eh? Think you're some kind of hero?" Wei Long didn't answer, his eyes fixed on the leader's every movement. The energy inside him was building, waiting for the right moment to strike. The leader's grin faded as he took a step forward, his hand resting on the hilt of a massive broadsword at his side. "You should have stayed home, boy. Now, I've got to teach you a lesson." Without warning, the leader lunged at Wei Long, drawing his sword in a single, fluid motion. The bandits cheered as their boss swung the blade down with terrifying force, but Wei Long was ready. He sidestepped the attack, his body moving almost instinctively, and unleashed a pulse of energy at the leader's back. The energy struck the bandit leader, but instead of sending him flying like the others, the massive man grunted and stumbled forward, shaking off the blow. He turned to face Wei Long, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "So, you've got some tricks up your sleeve," the leader muttered, his grip tightening on the sword. "But it's going to take more than that to bring me down." Wei Long narrowed his eyes. His energy wasn't strong enough yet. It lacked the precision and power needed to deal with someone of the leader's caliber. He could feel it slipping from his grasp, still too raw and untamed. He needed to find another way. The bandits began to close in, emboldened by their leader's resilience. Wei Long's mind raced. He couldn't take them all on at once, not in close combat. He had to think quickly. Suddenly, an idea struck him. Wei Long remembered the terrain outside the cave, the steep hills that surrounded it. If he could lure the leader and his men out, he might be able to use the environment to his advantage. He retreated slowly, keeping his eyes on the bandits as they advanced. The leader smirked, thinking Wei Long was backing down, and gestured for his men to follow. "Don't let him get away," the leader barked. Wei Long turned and sprinted toward the entrance of the cave, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the heavy footsteps of the bandits behind him, the leader's booming laughter echoing off the cave walls. The moment he burst out into the open, Wei Long darted toward the steep incline he had noticed earlier. The bandits were right on his heels, their shouts filling the air as they gave chase. Reaching the incline, Wei Long turned sharply and began to climb, his feet slipping slightly on the loose rocks. The bandits followed, but the rough terrain slowed them down, especially the larger leader, whose heavy armor made the climb difficult. Wei Long reached the top of the incline and stopped, turning to face his pursuers. The leader was nearly halfway up, his sword still in hand, but his movements were labored. Wei Long's mind raced as he considered his options. Then, a plan formed. With a deep breath, Wei Long reached inward, focusing all of his energy into his palm. He felt the power surge through him, stronger than before. It was as if the adrenaline had sharpened his focus, and for the first time he could sense the energy bending to his will. He raised his hand, and with a shout, unleashed a concentrated blast of energy at the loose rocks at the edge of the incline. The force of the blast shattered the stones, sending an avalanche of debris cascading down the hill toward the bandits. The leader's eyes widened in shock as the rocks tumbled toward him, but it was too late to react. The avalanche struck him with full force, sweeping him and his men off their feet. The bandits were thrown back down the incline, their bodies slamming into the ground below. Panting heavily, Wei Long stood at the top of the hill, watching as the dust settled. The bandits lay scattered at the bottom of the incline, groaning in pain. The leader was still alive, but barely. He struggled to stand, his body battered and bruised from the fall. Wei Long descended the hill slowly, his energy nearly spent. He approached the leader, who glared up at him with bloodshot eyes. You're stronger than you look," the leader rasped, coughing up blood. "But you won't survive out here alone." Wei Long stood over the defeated leader, his expression cold. "I don't need your advice." With a swift motion, Wei Long delivered a final blow to the leader, ending his life. The bandits who remained conscious watched in silence, too broken and afraid to retaliate. Wei Long took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what he had just done. He wasn't sure if he felt victorious or simply relieved. But one thing was certain. He had survived his first real battle, and the reward was now within his grasp. Turning away from the fallen leader, Wei Long made his way back toward the town, ready to claim his prize and take the next step on his journey. Subscribe to Sakura Audiobooks. Give us a thumbs up and leave a comment if you enjoy our work. Your support means a lot to us.